Hi there. Welcome to Headwaters Science Institute's Lunch with a Scientist. Join us as we talk with working scientists from all over the world as we explore what science research in their career actually looks like. We will host a new scientist every other week and allow them to present their research and follow that up with an open-ended question and answer session. We hope exposure to these professionals will allow students to not only see what type of research is possible, but also see what kinds of careers are accessible, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun along the way. Hey everyone, we're happy to re-release this Lunch with a Scientist episode with NASA engineer Eliza Montgomery in honor of the launch of the Artemis 1 rocket next week, which she helped work on. If you've been enjoying these episodes, we'd also like to encourage you to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. It helps spread the word about our channel and allows more people to be exposed to these amazing STEM professionals. Every little bit helps. Thanks again and enjoy the episode.
Everyone, thank you for joining us for Lunch with a Scientist. I'm Jen.
I'm Cassidy.
And today we're joined by Dr. Eliza Montgomery. She is a material and processes engineer at NASA. Hi, Eliza. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jen and Cassidy. It's great to be here.
So if you could go ahead and start by telling us a little bit about how you entered into your current position.
So I'm going to tell a little story about when I was a little girl. I was really into astronomy. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and where I was living, you could see the Milky Way and everything. There was not light pollution like there is now. And when I was 10 years old, my dad took me, Halley's Comet was coming around, and it was a big deal. And he scoped out the perfect spot to go see it. And I remember literally being 10 years old and going in my jammy shoes, and it was freezing. And I went outside and got to see it in a telescope, and it was just amazing. And so I loved the stars, and then I wanted to work, I thought, at NASA, right? But I was a little kid, and I was very unsure, shy. I didn't really know how to speak up, and I didn't even ever see a path for myself at NASA. Like, that just seemed like a ridiculous thing. We're used to seeing something on TV, and it just seems like a surreal thing, right? So I continued on. I actually went to college and went into engineering. But I really honestly picked the hardest major. I knew I liked science, first of all, but I picked the hardest major, and I figured if there was something else and it was too difficult for me, I could pick something else less difficult. But then I ended up being okay in it and continued on. So I liked what I was doing, but I also still loved NASA. But again, never even considered like talking to anybody about wanting to do that. And so this is my lesson for students. Talk to people about what you want to do. Don't be so shy or scared or hesitant, because, you never know where it will lead you. So anyhow, when I was in college, I was definitely like the kind of person that I would talk to someone if they talked to me, but I was too scared to talk to somebody and approach someone. So when I went to my first job after I graduated, I thought I will do an experiment and try to be friendly with people and get to know them and not be like so unapproachable. So I did that. It worked really well, right? Because it normally does in social situations. And also I had to work with adults now. It wasn't just me and my peers. I had to step it up. So I had to figure out how to do that at the same time. Also in your early 20s, so you don't really know who you are, what you're doing exactly always. So it was just, again, a little sort of experiment here. So I was a product development engineer, and I worked in a company that made textile materials. And what textiles are basically like fabrics, but also they are acoustic insulation for aircraft. So I worked in acoustic and thermal insulation, helping control temperatures and sound in your aircraft that you would fly in. And then we did materials in extreme environments for like high temperature, and then also things like bulletproof vesting materials. So it was interesting. I never, knew about that stuff when I was a kid. So it was a really interesting thing to do. And it allowed me to get to, see the world a little bit. I got to travel and stuff when I went there. But because I wasn't scared to talk to people, and oftentimes our salespeople didn't know how to tell me what the engineer wanted from the company, I would just talk to the engineers directly. And because I had decided to be friendly, right, they were like, oh, you're good talking to people? How about you go into sales? And that was a nightmare, right? So for me, so I will say that I was good at it, but I had to handle $1 million worth of sales to aircraft industry a year or a month. I mean, and that was a lot of pressure. Yeah. So what I want to say to any students out there is just because you're good at something, you don't have to do it if you don't love it, though. If you all that might mean is that you might be good at the other thing that you actually like make your effort and put your time into. So I'm just going to put that sort of message out there as well. So what the job did allow me to do was kind of go and travel and get to meet different people and different people at aircraft companies and just actually really very different industries. And so I realized I wanted to go to grad school, and I thought I want to do something. I just didn't know what I wanted to do yet, right? So I didn't want to go to grad school for something that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I went to this one trade show, and I literally sitting in the audience, and there's a graduate student who was getting her degree with NASA, and she was presenting with her NASA colleagues. And it kind of clicked that, oh my gosh, these are just people. Why am I doing this to myself? I can be here. And that's where I realized it was a possibility for me. Again, I will say, side note, I did not go talk to them and say, hey, how's it going? Because knowing what I know now as a NASA employee, I probably could have talked to them, and they really want people who are interested and want to be there. So if I would have talked to them, I probably could have got an internship really soon after that. I probably could have gotten them to even pay for my graduate school. So you don't know what you don't know. And I think just also speaking up for yourself, because you're your own advocate, is really important as you go along. And so I went to graduate school at the Pennsylvania State University in materials. They have a great materials program. But again, I wanted to do materials in extreme environments, but I didn't have anything else in mind except that I wanted to work at NASA, and I don't even know what that was going to mean. So people don't usually go to grad school that kind of like, but I did. And I matched with an advisor who was doing corrosion of materials, and she was working for the Army and doing a project for them at the time. And it seemed like a good fit. So can't explain to you really why, but it just seemed like a good fit because I liked her personality. So that's also important. And so I worked there, and then I got my master's and PhD there when I was there. It was 5 years. But while I was also there, she asked me one day what I wanted to do. And I told her I really wanted to work at NASA. And no one had asked me before. And I didn't just, again, I'm like, I didn't volunteer it. Because I think I had enough professors and people in the world tell me, like, why would you want to do that? Why do you think you could do that? That I just didn't voice it anymore, right? So what I did do is just tell her. And turns out we teach a class every year where I was at grad school for people in industry for corrosion. And she had someone from the NASA corrosion laboratory in her class the year before I got there. And that was March. And within 3 months, I was doing an internship at NASA. She called them, and like that's how quickly that happened. So I got there, and I was just beside myself. Like, I know for sure I cried. I was that happy, like, while I was there multiple times, because you're like, this is what I want to do. And I will tell you, as an intern, I did whatever I needed to do, take pictures, whatever little grunt work, why I want to do that is because I thought, if I get my foot in the door, there's an opportunity here for me. It's not to do this always, but if I get my foot in the door and I do one thing well, I will get more work and I will get more opportunities. And that is exactly what happened. When I was there, I finished my degree. I interned a couple times, was a postdoctoral fellow. And what that means is that after you do your PhD, you can do research. So I did that for 3 years at NASA. And then it was an awkward time because the orbiter program had just ended retired. And so they weren't really hiring. So then I was a contractor for 4 years. And then finally, I literally waited 7 years, just like, please, open up a position. And they did. So interestingly, though, the lab that I had been working in, I now run that whole lab. So, and that's when I first got there as an intern. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do, and that happened. It was baby steps. So I really want every student to know that, like, very few times in anyone's life are there a giant leap where you get where you want to go immediately. It's baby steps getting there. So keeping your eye on the prize, even if you have other like things that are stressors in your life. I had other stresses going on in my life, but like keeping my eye on the prize, the only thing I didn't let waver was my education, because I knew it was a pathway to where I wanted to go. And so something may have been happening really negative the rest of my life. I just kind of kept that, at least that path was golden for me. I was keeping that going. So I know it was a long way to get there, but that's how I got where I was going. And it's also important to know for students, I think, all of you out there to know that no one's path is necessarily like straight. So there's nothing wrong with that. And you can change your mind, because my field, when I was my first engineering degree, was completely different from my second engineering degree. And I had to like relearn all the chemistry I had forgotten in undergrad school. So anyways, so that's where I'm here. So I'm a materials process engineer. I can go to the next slide. I'm in the engineering directorate. It's the largest directorate at the Kennedy Space Center. We do all the engineering and design for all of the components, whether it be rockets or launch structures and everything. So
I think the advice you gave for kids who are maybe, thinking about becoming, a scientist or going into some sort of science or engineering career, I think you gave some really awesome advice and like really cool insight into how you got into that career. And I was wondering if you had any additional advice for a student who may be thinking about going into a science or engineering career, but is, maybe on the more shy side or on the quieter side. What do you wish you would have known when you were in that position?
I think what I wish I would have known was that opportunities are out there. They're not, if you want them, they're there if you can get them. I don't think I even had resources where I lived. I lived in a really small town. Nobody that I would have asked, a guidance counselor, would have ever imagined. They would have been like, yeah, right, okay, good luck with that. So I think just quite honestly, if you reach out, there are students who reach out to me by my webpage, and I have helped people with their science fair projects all over the country. The worst for a student is the worst you can get is a no. And so if you can try to figure out if you like science, what you might gravitate towards, like a more biology, or more interested in chemistry, how would you even know what that is? Because you're just studying those things in school. My perspective is always trying to figure out what industry you like to work in. I wanted to do space. Someone else you could literally pick any industry in the entire world and there's a scientist in it. Because on my industry, there are HR people and lawyers and everybody in the space industry. So I would tell students who are really shy, I don't even know, like, there's a lot of research and fact finding you can do for yourself, but maybe it's just kind of getting that inner strength to get up and ask somebody, ask an expert, ask someone. There are a lot of scientists who most of them are introverts. And so they're more than happy and understand if you're shy to talk to you. When we do science fairs, most of the students are scared at the beginning, and we try to ease them into that. So yeah, I think that's probably the best advice I would give. I don't know how to not be scared to speak up, and except just like to be sick and tired of it and just do it. So
that's awesome advice.
Yeah. You have to be frustrated enough, I guess, with the world. Yeah. All right. So I will go into, Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about my typical work roles. So question is, I never know what to call myself. Am I an engineer, scientist, project manager? I'm all of those things and more. Because work roles can mean wearing different hats at different times, just like I'm sure you might have in your regular life too, right? Even if you play on a team or anything like that, you wear different roles. So work roles are not discrete, they intermix. I gave a couple examples here because let's say ISS program needs an expert. They need a subject matter expert to understand a corrosion issue that they're having on the space station. Well, then we determine based on that information, you put the other hat on. We need to do some testing. Oh, well, I also run a test lab. So I will work the test plan and figure out how to get that going. And then we might need some more information. So we're going to collaborate with the university or other NASA center and try to figure out what to do. Sometimes we even collaborate with the Department of Defense. So that's 3 different hats. And sometimes there's only one person who does each of those things on your team. And other times it's the same person. For me, it's the same person just because that's just the way it's working out right now on our field. But it's convenient because I know where the test lab is and I know how to get access to it really easily. So because I run it. But also like a space biologist right now, we're working on something that they are looking into 3D printed materials in space. So they're going to want to print them in space as 3D materials, but they want to use them to grow plants in the chamber, so a growth media. And so we created a research project for that, and we received a proposal and funding to do that. So you have to put your science hat on for that, your fundamental science hat on that. That's what experimental research is. It's different than testing. But then we also need to do testing. So we have to create this test plan of testing different materials. And then in my other role, I was a materials engineer. I actually have to approve and sign off on the use of those new materials. A different materials engineer could also just sign off on the use of those materials as well. So that's how that works. So just there's different roles in your life, but also there's different roles here in your job that you might end up having. So don't expect to, and it's also boring if you're maybe just doing one. You might want to do more than one. As a lot of people juggle things. Before I talk about what I'm doing, I want to just give a little overview of the Artemis program. That is NASA's deep space mission program. And that's because I'm going to talk to you about crew modules and stuff, and I want you to understand why we're even doing this. So we right now are working program. It's named Artemis, and it basically is a rocket that is going to go around the moon. The whole point is it's going to go to the moon, build an outpost on the moon, and then it's going to go to Mars eventually. But that is long term. Right now, we're in this first stage here, Artemis 1. So that's just going to launch an uncrewed vehicle around the moon. It's going to test the launch and full landing of the entire thing. It has taken almost 10 years to get here because we had to redesign everything. Some things look similar to Apollo, some things look similar to shuttle. The vehicles we're using, they're actually quite different though, and they're actually much larger and stuff. So Exploration Ground Systems is actually building the launch structures. And then we had to build all new launch structure systems. And then Space Launch Systems is the rockets. Orion is the module that the crew ride in. And then Gateway is a lunar outpost that's going to orbit around the moon and allow, it's like interesting, right? And like when I said that, I was like, what are you doing? They're going to be putting supplies there, and then people are going to be docking there on their way to the moon. And then the lunar landers will be the things that take people and supplies actually to the moon. So that'll be later, the outpost. So all these things are kind of like built in order. And then life support systems are actually the spacesuits and the new kind of things we need to do for deep space, because we have to have different systems in order to go to deep space rather than just the space station, because it's actually a pretty quick trip to the space station. Comparatively, it's less than 2 days compared to the moon and even further. So, and also for the Artemis program, I wanted to break down a few things. I'm not going to go into every single detail, but I work and live at NASA, so I think everybody understands this. They do not. We have solid rocket boosters, and they are the thing that basically gets the main and the core stage main engine, the orange piece, off the ground. So it's aluminum oxide, and it'll be important later why that matters. But it's a solid rocket booster, so it is a really, really powerful engine. And then all the components at the top here are part of the vehicle where the crew will ride in. This is the first part. This cryogenic area will be what makes it go through space up to a certain point. And then eventually solar panel arrays will be deployed, and then that will fuel the vehicle to the moon. And the reason why they break it out here is because these two, even in this picture down below, and the crew vehicle is attached to the life support system. So you would have all of your life support here. You have your air, your water, everything down below. The above where the crew will be living. But they have it separate just to show, because eventually they do, when it lands, it only lands as the crew vehicle. And the top part is interesting because it's called the launch abort system, and it covers over the top area so that if there's an issue where the rocket goes the wrong direction or some sort of disaster starts to happen during launch, we have to plan for everything. It will jettison off the top, and then you will not lose crew. So it will just land with parachutes and happy day, right? So just a bad day for the booster people. So I wanted to give a work role example, because what I do, I'm not going to talk about a little bit about the testing, but mostly about the materials and engineering part that I do, because that's the largest part. And that's the part I like the most, because I get to integrate in with lots of different groups of people. And I know sometimes students hate team projects. I will say I hated almost every team project I ever did because I did most of the work. But that is not an option in the real world, really, most of the time. So in something that I love is my landing and recovery team. Their job is to recover the crew module at the end of the mission. It lands in the Pacific Ocean and it docks in San Diego, and then it gets transported back to Kennedy Space Center, or it gets torn apart and inspected, and the crew's already out. They get out in California, obviously. But so what we helped design, one of the first things I helped design was the Orion Recovery Cradle Assembly, or the ORCA, which I love the name of it because it actually goes in the ocean, so it makes sense, right? And so what this does is actually goes, this is what it looks like on the, like, just in the well deck, not flooded. But this actually is used to go out into the ocean, and there's tugboats that attach to it. And then it retrieves the vehicle, and then it attaches onto here. And then you can see it in the well deck. It is a very aggressive environment in here. Like, so when you have to design this, you have to design this to make sure that it can withstand the wave load, the salt environment, and being dinged and scratched, and that it will be strong enough and stable enough to hold this crew module. There are going to be people in here. It matters. So the team's going to have project managers that take care of schedule and budgeting, and engineers are going to design it. And then also there's so many different engineers. There will be like electrical engineers, but this is for the ORCA. So at this point, you're going to look at structural engineers, and people are going to be modeling, also making sure the stresses and strains are good. So your structural engineer might just design this main structure, and then the engineer who's modeling it might come back and say, nope, it's too weak here, you need to redesign. So that's a whole part of the team. And then human factors make sure that everything's safe, nothing's too sharp, nothing's going to pinch you, nothing's going to be a problem when you're processing it. And then quality literally is going to make sure that it's built correctly when that time comes for it to be built by somebody, because it's not just on paper, it has to be, produced eventually. My role as a materials engineer was help the design engineers determine which materials they're going to use and make sure that they're compatible with each other, because sometimes two metals that are wrong together don't work. And then also they have to be compatible with the environment. And not everything on here is a metal. There are plastics and all sorts of other materials as well. There's foams. We had to make sure they're just the right kind. And a lot of the stuff we also have to consider, hey, is it flammable? It can't be flammable. So there's a lot of different things that have to go into this. And then we actually had to put on the little hat of testing. So I had to take this. I basically made a mock-up sample of what the base structure is, the metal that we use. And then I put a coating system on that I thought would be appropriate, a couple different ones actually, and went into my laboratory and then exposed them to alternating seawater, sort of mock the environment they would see. And then we tested it long-term, so that not long-term forever, but we're only going to use this, once every year or two. So I could mock it for 10 years worth of use. So that's how we actually chose the coating. And I will say I'm very proud of it because it looks pristine today. And a lot of the corrosion happens, you'll see, very fast. So this thing is looking great. And so, but I couldn't have done it without, no materials engineer is going to design this. No, just structural engineer is going to design this for it to last. Project manager is going to do nothing but look at paper. So we had to work as a team. And then, interestingly, there's a whole other team that designs the model that's used to do the training for the crew to even retrieve the vehicle. So there's that whole thing. There are engineers who just live in a computer and they just do modeling. And it's not just doing that. That's all they do. But it is really important, because if we don't have that, we can't do it. We can't continue on. And then there are, just for you guys to know that even though sometimes maybe a common goal, working together might be a challenge, you still have to succeed and produce the product at the end. So that's what, this is a perfect example of being like a cog in the machine, but every cog has to work. You can't have one that's failing. So why does it matter in our environment? Why do we care so much? Because the atmospheric environment at KSC is ideal for metal corrosion. The salt mist is really high. The UV is high. You can see in these pictures below that the VAB is here. This is the vehicle assembly building, and then that's where we assemble the rockets and put the crew vehicle on top. It travels out here, but our launch pad's only a quarter of a mile from the ocean. It's really close. And if you've been to the beach, you know that even close to the beach, it's salty. At the beach, it's extremely salty air. You might not even go in the water where you leave the salt on you. So consider that. That's what we have to exist with all day long. And then we have a lot of rainfall and high humidity. And then the rockets, remember I talked about the rockets earlier, the heavy lift solid rocket boosters. Well, they actually emit 0.1 molar hydrochloric acid cloud. That is not a vapor cloud of water. It is an acid cloud that comes off of that. That's not true for most of the other launches because those are usually a different propellant, but ours is acidic. So you have to consider, we do rinse it, but it's not going to rinse all of it. It's not going to get out of little crevices. So, and something that I've discovered through my studies that's wasn't really written anywhere before, it seems very logical now, is that corrosion is actually higher in the winter than the summer because there is more fog and the temperatures are lower. So your condensation in your fog actually keeps things wetter longer. I counterintuitively thought that the summer was much more corrosive, and it's not at all. It's significantly less corrosive because the heat is so high, it dries things immediately. And then it just kind of stops the corrosion or slows it. So, and then you also get like increased wave heights in the wintertime because the seas are just rougher naturally. So you get more salts in the air and then it corrodes. So, and because our environment is where it's located and the humidity is relatively high all the time, you get a light layer of moisture on the surface at all times. And that is just literally a light layer of corrosion like environment. So yeah, that's just the way it is. So, and then there you go. So and the laboratory that I actually manage is its official name is the Beachside Atmospheric Corrosion Test Site. It's a lot, but it says what it is too, right? So we actually have a drone team at Kennedy Space Center that helps do inspections, and they do me a huge favor of taking a beautiful picture of our test site on the ocean because this is really where it's located. So, and then someone else took a picture from a helicopter for me, So, and I actually have corrosion. We're located here at the beach site, but we have all these little sites here are all different corrosion sites. We measure corrosion rate and chlorides as a function of time and distance from the ocean every month. So we understand how more corrosive it is at our site versus how much more corrosive it is at the launch pad. The reason why I do that is because I can use my test site as an accelerated site. I can test something for 5 years at my site and know that it will last 20 years at my launch pad because we're accelerated. So that kind of like made some sort of, we've made those correlations and then we can speed it up because if we want something to last for 20 years, I don't have 20 years to test it. That's ridiculous. And so we will qualify all of our coatings at Kennedy Space Center, but then we also test methods of preparation, application, and actually survey a ton of customers, other space companies, commercial space companies, Department of Defense, industries, universities. I even have some students with some test panels out there. We do a lot of things because it's a really interesting site. And so it's really unique. And so that's the main thing that we like to promote for that. And also, if you type in NASA corrosion into the internet, you will get to our laboratory. So there's a really cool website with all sorts of data, weather data, corrosion rates data, and just like basically what we do out there. But corrosion in launched environment, why we even care is because the mobile launcher is a very tall steel structure. And right now it's like the paint is already 10 years old because it was built so long ago in preparation for launch in 2022. That's how long things take. So once it's built, then we're going to use it, but it just took a long time to get there. So it's already been subjected to weather. And then here we're testing the water system. So you can see it's already like being exposed to moisture and sort of damage from operations and stuff. And corrosion, the KSC environment is just going to be like really heavily affect that steel. So I'm going to show you pictures in another slide that will show you what one looks like if it's not protected versus protected. And it's a striking difference. So when we measure corrosion rates, it's a metric that we use called mils per year, and it means the mils of thickness that you lose a loss of a surface in a year. And it ranges between around 2 at the launch pad, 15 in our test site, depending on the location. And then, but these are some examples of different conditions. When this launches, so the mobile launcher is something that actually is not at the launch pad all the time. It actually rolls onto the launch pad. You can imagine the weight. It's over 10 million pounds. It's a lot. Everything out here is really tall for launching. It's almost unbelievable sometimes when you go in here. I'm sure, but there are some really cool videos and things that you can look online for to check out watching the mobile launcher being built, watching it go in and out of the VAB. You should check it out because it's just really, really interesting. If you don't know what's going on with our space program. And by the way, it's not my space program. It is the entire country's space program. So every student's program, it is yours too. It's just as much yours as it is mine. And that's just how it is. Just so you guys know that, if you're ever thinking like NASA would be really cool to work at, how would I do that? I don't even see myself there. You it's yours. It's your country's. That's how it goes. So know that, like, think about it that way. So also for corrosion launched environments, I want to explain to you guys that we built these lightning towers. Sometimes we make mistakes really high up. These are as tall as the Washington Monument, each of them. So sometimes you make mistakes and don't prep it right, and then you have to repair it. And that is really tall. Like, there's no crane. They had to crawl up there. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, but here's something cool about the launch structure. So these lightning towers actually cause the entire, instead of ground being on the ground, it makes the ground, or makes the lightning think the ground is up here at the top. So it won't hit the launch structure because it literally thinks this is ground. So that's what I think is really interesting about the new lightning tower we have. Instead of having like one on top of, we used to have one on top of the structure, but now we've just made it higher, and it will never have this problem. We definitely have lightning striking the tops of these, but not everything else. And then we also have a really important drone team that helps us inspect corrosion. These are pictures from the drone where you see damaged wires. And they're just as important because they're helping us inspect our stuff and make sure we're okay. So I do have a little cute corrosion test site right here at the launch pad. So we test all sorts of materials for the different programs. So what is corrosion anyways? I'm talking about this, but why? And what is this? It occurs because the metal wants to go back to its natural state. There's a reason why gold doesn't corrode. It stays shiny for a long time because it's in its natural state almost completely when you get it out of the ground. Iron is natural state is basically rusty corrosion. I'm sure you've seen it places. That's its natural state. It's trying so hard to get there. And we have applied all this heat and all this pressure to get it into a beautiful little metal. But as soon as it touches the air, it wants to start to go back. It will corrode. You could spit on it, and like an hour later, you're going to see corrosion. So that's how fast it wants to go. And this is what all the steel structures are made of. That's what our mobile launcher is made of. Everything, so that's why it matters. That's why I'm going to talk a lot about steel corrosion here. And there are 3 things necessary, though. You need an electrolyte, or even a fine moisture layer can be, your electrolyte doesn't have to be just in a solution, an exposed metal surface, and oxygen. So this is a perfect little corrosion cell that I made. I drew this thing here, and it shows like the metal trying to go back into its original form just with a water droplet. And this is what's happened. I'm going to get a little bit into the chemistry of it in a little bit, so I'm not going to go too far in it in this slide, just to show you what that reaction is, though. And it's important to know that even a humidity of like 45% can cause corrosion, and on a surface that's contaminated, it can even be lower, because salts are hygroscopic. And what that means is they draw in moisture and they hold it for a long period of time. The only way to really dry out salt truly is to put it in an oven and drive the water out above the boiling temperature of water. That's why sometimes you see rice in salt, like shakers, because they're really just trying to pull the moisture out, and the rice will absorb the moisture so the salt doesn't clump up and get too moist. That's the only reason why. So it's because it's hygroscopic. And so I want to show you the pictures, though, because they're sort of interesting here. This is a panel that would have started out pristine, and after 10 days, it's already started to corrode. After 90 days, it's very corroded. This top picture here of this shows a panel that actually has been out for 20 years, and it looks perfect. So this is something that's been out for 5 years and is already what's called corroding or exfoliating. Exfoliating would be like lots of tiny little layers. And so this is what 5 years would do. In 20 years, you wouldn't even see this anymore. It would be back in the ground. So this is just an example of why we protect the launch structures is what we do, and why it's so important to care about corrosion, because it's going to happen really fast. But if you protect it properly, something will last 20 years or longer. I'm going to go really quickly into the typical forms of corrosion, because I'm not going to focus on all of them. Uniform is how our launch structures will corrode. We're going to talk a little bit about galvanic corrosion. That is when 2 different metals are together, and they actually they have different potentials. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is. And that causes one to corrode faster, and the one is protected. In this example, there's a stainless steel bolt and an aluminum plate. All the stainless steel bolts have a little white around them, and what that is aluminum corrosion. So at the interface between the stainless, which is perfectly protected, and the aluminum, it's starting to have little dots of white, and those are actually little pits. So that's why this is actually an issue. You can see over time, you would get corrosion of the aluminum, and then the bolts might fall out. So, and then pitting is something that happens often for aluminum and stainless steel. I'm not going to go too far into aluminum and stainless steel this time in this talk, but that's just how they corrode. And then there are things that normally if something's under stress, it'll be fine. But if you add a little bit of corrosive environment, it'll immediately crack and break. And that is a huge problem. So we have to care about that, because some aerospace alloys, you can't have it crack when it's in space, right? That's extremely scary. There are people who just dedicate all their life to worrying about fracturing, something fracturing, and stress corrosion cracking is part of that. And I have to kind of pop in when that's an issue. And then crevice corrosion is configuration based, really. It's water wicking in somewhere and causing corrosion on the inside. Sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's not. But those are things that we can control as engineers. As a design engineer, materials engineer, you can literally control this. There are a lot of things that are easy to control. And hydrogen embrittlement is really when it's similar to stress corrosion cracking, except that it's when hydrogen is actually introduced into the base metal structure and causes embrittlement, but it fails similarly where it breaks catastrophically. So why I talked about different potentials and for galvanic stuff, why it matters. It's going to get a little bit, the word galvanic and galvanic corrosion are similar. Also that a galvanic coating is sort of confusing too, but we'll explain that in a little bit. So here's your gold, and it has a very high, or what we call noble potential. It is a cathode. It is less active. It's any of these things, carbon, you see carbon corroding? No, it's not a metal, but it's not going to corrode. Gold, titanium almost never corrodes. It's very, very hard to corrode. And then as you go up here, these things they corrode very, very fast. Zinc corrodes very, very fast. Aluminum's corrode fast if in the wrong environment. Our friendly steel here loves to corrode. But here is a picture of, if you have like the distance between the two metals is far apart, it'll cause a more active corrosion reaction than it will if they're close together. So here's an example of iron with zinc. And in this case, the iron is the cathode. So the cathode is going to be protected, and it's going to cause the anode to just corrode a lot faster. Same thing here, but it's the opposite, where the iron now is the anode, and the copper, it's a little lower, or it's a little higher in potential, less negative, will be protected. So that's going to drive that reaction. The iron is actually going to corrode. So it really matters if you put two dissimilar metals together, that's going to cause a problem. This is an example of what would happen. Literally, you have your anode is corroding because your cathode connected to it, and then is literally just causing the one to deplete and corrode away. So now when you're out and you see things, you might look around and look at corrosion and see like, oh, look, that looks like galvanic corrosion. That piece of metal looks perfect. And the one next to it looks terrible. Like you're going to maybe sort of identifying that kind of stuff, which might be kind of funny, but it's reality. But as you can see, when I get to the next slide about corrosion, each metal has its own potential. And what that means is like propensity to corrode, or it's driving reaction of whether it wants to corrode or not. So I want to go into some chemistry here. And so we talked about how every metal has a potential, and it also delivers a corresponding current, because corrosion is an actual battery. And I'm going to show you an example of that really soon. But the potential is basically the likelihood that something will corrode. And so like I showed, noble metals are more resistant to corrosion. The current is how reactive it is in the environment though. So it might be likely to corrode, but the current is almost like how fast it's going to corrode, what the kinetics are of that. So if you have a high current, if you have a high current, you're going to have a high potential, and that's going to drive the reaction. So something interesting, in every corrosion reaction, hydrogen is produced, and it is the byproduct for all of them. And it's a proton, so it's the positive charge, and it reacts with the electron, which is the negative charge. So that is literally your cathode and your anode. That is why that is degrading. That's why all metals degrade. It's all a battery, whether it's a slow, sloppy battery like corrosion, or it's a really nice, efficient battery like what we use in our electronics. They're all batteries. And so this is an example of the perfect thing that someone ever told me, even in grad school, I liked cartoons because I could kind of visualize that. I'm a visual learner. And your metal here, when you starts the corrosion reaction, your anodic reaction is literally just a metal ion leaving the surface and going into the solution. It's being driven off by the reaction. And then the hydrogen, if it's an acid, you're only going to get hydrogen. And that's the only thing that's going to happen. It's going to drive off your electron, and then you're going to create your circuit here. But then if you also have something like in water, so like your vinegar, your acid, anything like that is going to be hydrogen only. And you're only going to produce like a hydrogen gas. But if you have something in water or salt water, you're going to have oxygen also, and then hydrogen as well, also driving the reaction. But the gas that's formed, regardless of which experiment you have, is going to be a hydrogen gas because the electrons combine together, because hydrogen is also, hydrogen will also combine together. Yeah. Because as the electrons are being given off and create the hydrogen gas. So it'll be like 2 H's will turn into hydrogen gas. So just for you guys to look at it a little closer, because I know all of you understand this right away. There's no way I didn't understand this till I was in graduate school, but it took a little learning and understanding it and practicing it and stuff to understand it. But just the main takeaway is that you're losing a metal ion, and then in order to lose that, you have to gain something. So you're gaining your hydrogen. So then, okay. And then something interesting I want to explain, though, is if you're in an acid, you're not going to get, so people always say like corrosion needs oxygen. But what does that really mean? Because how does corrosion need oxygen if you have this acid environment? Where's your oxygen here? Well, because acid is not actually corrosion, it's corroding technically, it's oxidizing. When you're looking at the reaction with the acid, it's just etching it. It's not good, but that you're getting this driving reaction the whole time. You're getting hydrogen bubbles, the iron and the metal is going off the solution, but you're not having any corrosion product. You don't get a lot of rust because you don't have oxygen in it. Now, if you put oxygen in that solution, you will immediately start to get corrosion products, and it won't just be etching anymore. I mean, you will get a buildup of corrosion product in a solution, but it won't be like necessarily attached to the metal because the iron is not going to react with oxygen. But when you have something like the first picture over here, the first picture we showed where it had like the blob of corrosion at the top, that's something that combines with iron combining with oxygen makes that corrosion product. So you can see down here, it makes Fe2O3 if it's an iron, Al2O3 if it's aluminum, but it's an oxide. That's that crusty thing you see. That only happens if there's oxygen. So that's why people say corrosion only happens with oxygen. Technically, they mean corrosion products only happen, but corrosion is happening regardless. So there's our science lesson for the day. Now there's just a little bit of fun left. So I'm talking a little bit about galvanic corrosion, but this is my favorite example because it's perfectly designed terribly. And it works really well, though, it's functionally, structurally great. Its materials are terrible. So this is the perfect galvanic cell. We know that the galvanic cell is at least 2 dissimilar metals with different potentials in contact with each other, right? And they're immersed in the same environment. Well, the immersion environment here is just outside in the humidity at the Space Center on the mobile launcher. And so in this picture, it is a vibration dampener. So picture like this is a spring and it's just plates are bouncing on the spring and it helps to control vibration. So this seems great because inside the mobile launcher, they don't corrode. They look beautiful because they're not exposed to moisture and salts. So they put the same ones on the inside as the outside, not thinking anything differently. Well, this corroded in 6 months. The rectangular blocks are aluminum. And then the wires here are stainless steel. And this seems like perfectly fine. But it's not. The bolts here are a steel and they're galvanized fasteners. Now, when I say galvanized, I mean it has a zinc coating on it because the reason why galvanized is called galvanized is because zinc is more and steel are galvanic couples, right? They're 2 similar metals, but if you put zinc on top of steel, it will actually protect the steel because the zinc will slowly corrode. It'll have a slow galvanic reaction. That's why it's called a galvanized coating. But really it means zinc and it's just confusing you. That's all it's trying to do, right? The industry. So, but the galvanic couple, there's 3 different metals at this point. It is a accidental battery. It is a beautiful battery. It worked very well as a battery, not so good as a dampener. So we had to replace them all. That's not good, right? But it's the same reaction as how batteries work. And so here's how a battery works. Pretty simple. It looks really complicated, but it's just like we learned. There's your cathode here, and you have an electrolyte, and then you have an anode, and then the anode and are just going to react to each other. The anode's actually going to be the thing that reacts. The cathode's going to be fine. And then the anode's going to eventually deplete. When the anode depletes completely, your battery is dead. And if your battery is dead too long or there's some sort of damage, then you're going to get, it's going to be corroding in here. That's what's happening in your battery. You'd literally get a corrosion reaction. And then this is something that, like, if the pressure is just too high, the corrosion starts to leak out is what's happening. Or the reaction that's created during the corrosion of the two is also acidic as well. But that's literally what's happening there is the your inside your battery is corroding. Now, rechargeable batteries are a little bit different because they use more metals like lithium. They're specialty metals that will actually have a reversible reaction. So you're still getting electrochemical corrosion reaction, but you're really just getting electrochemical reaction, but it's not actually corroding. It's just going back and forth. So that's why they're a little different and you don't see a lot of corrosion there. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit because I talk so much about steel with aluminum. So in general, you don't need to know all these details, but there are some aluminums like 5 and 6000 series that are used for structures. You might see them and they're like, gray metals, and they're not usually protected and they look fine. They corrode very slowly. But there's other metals that actually have alloys elements in them to make them better for fatigue and better like higher strength materials. But they're very poor for corrosion. And it just so happens that all of the crew module and rockets are made of this 2000 and 7000 series because you need it to be lightweight, high strength, and it's extremely susceptible to corrosion, especially in our environment. So you have to do special corrosion protection just to make sure that they're going to be okay. But the reason why they are corroding is the same thing we kind of learned before, where there is a dissimilar metal here. The copper, aluminum copper, think about it just like a galvanic cell. It is a piece of copper next to aluminum. They have 2 different potentials that are high enough apart. You can see they're 1.3 volt, 1.13 volts apart. That's pretty high. And if it has a coating over top of it, you're good to go. It will protect both of those things from the environment. If the coating is damaged or the coating is porous or there is no coating, you'll start to get some corrosion between the two here. And it's called de-alloying, which means like part of the alloy starts to separate from the other one. This is an actual picture that my wonderful coworker made for when she was getting her PhD. And it is an actual piece of copper. This is a scanning electron microscope picture where it's on the inside here. And this is the aluminum on the outside, and it has corroded and started to de-alloy. This is an actual picture of it happening. And so I thought this was kind of cool to see. So not just steel here, but look at like this is something happening like within an alloy. It's not just happening when 2 pieces of metal touch. It can happen in the alloy itself. And then what do we do? My gosh, corrosion is terrible, but we can't just fret about it all day long. So what we do is we do protection. We do barriers to protect it. We have to find a way to get water or oxygen from reaching the environment or any acid or any corrosive environment. So we use greases sometimes when we can't paint them. When we can paint them, we were going to paint them. You could adhere a coating and adhesive. The best corrosion protection we have out here are plastic labels from our label maker. They work fantastic over time because there's an adhesive there. And it's a true barrier because then you have plastic on top of it. And then you could do things like galvanizing, which again, we're using that word a lot, but galvanizing, we're just using a dissimilar metal there. And so there's different chemical protections you can do as well. There's chemical treatments. You can do plating. I'm sure you've all seen like plated metals and, chromium and stuff like that. That is something that silver plated, all that kind of stuff. That's another way to protect from corrosion. And then surface profile really matters. Something you almost never think of, but I don't know if you've ever seen anyone like rough up a surface before they paint it. This is really important because it needs something to stick to. Think of it like Velcro, where if your surface profile is too shallow or it's really smooth in many cases, it's just going to fall right off. Same thing for, really literally if your Velcro is really small, it's just going to fall right off. It's not going to work. And if your surface profile is just right, the coating is going to stick. Or if it's too thick and then the surface profile is too low, it's going to fall right off too. Even though it seems like strange for something to fall from the microscopic level, coatings will fall off if they're not adhered properly. And so literally at the same time, you have to understand how the microscopic level and atomic level of something works on the surface, and then like how it applied to a giant launch structure. So kind of think both ways. And then, but if something is too high and you have like this really rough surface, you're not going to get a coating that's even because the coating's going to be too thin. You're going to have pieces of the metal sticking out. This is a great example of ground support equipment that they didn't prepare properly, and the whole thing flaked off. And then they called me and asked what happened. And the first thing I said was, how did you prepare it? And, we worked it out, but they thought it was the coating and they were all mad. Well, it wasn't. But, this is just an important lesson to learn, that it's not just, there's different factors, and you have to, like, when you understand something, you're that deep in your field. I never imagined I would be that deep in a field of corrosion, but it's actually super interesting. And it truly is an material in an extreme environment. And I truly do get to add to NASA's mission. I'm doing all the things I wanted to do, just never in the way I imagined when I was 10 years old. So, but I love it. So, and then also I get to work in this beautiful lab. So I wanted to share just a little bit about a research project that we're working on. It is, remember I talked earlier about hydrogen embrittlement and how if something has hydrogen infused into it, it might actually crack and break. Well, any high strength steel is really sensitive to that, and it will crack and break. So things that are plating will actually introduce, because it's an acidic, you actually have to use an electrical current to drive materials onto a metal to plate them onto the surface. It's the same thing as electrochemical reaction. It's almost the opposite, because you're trying to, instead of drive metal off, you're trying to drive metal onto it. So it's the reverse of the corrosion reaction. And so there's a lot of videos and stuff online. You can look and see little pictures of how these things happen. But they actually drive in hydrogen then, because if you're driving in electrical, you're driving in also your protons, right? And your electrons. So it drives hydrogen into the vehicle or the metal, and then it literally will just break catastrophically and you won't even realize it. And then, so what we're trying to do is use a commercially available coating that was recently developed for this and apply them to the high strength fasteners. And we will actually be putting these on all of our launch structures once we've tested them very extensively, right? But we made little mock-ups here. So there's mock-ups of the exact materials that are used for launch structures. And then our bolts we are applying here, we actually apply them at the right torque. So it's exactly what would be installed. So it's really like one for one. And then we put them outside as a function of time. And then we take them off, inspect them for corrosion, and then pull the bolts out and then put them in a tensile test. We're seeing if the original breaking strength is different from the breaking strength over time after it started to corrode. Because the coating should protect it enough that, after a year, it should still have the same strength. If it doesn't, then we know that it's not protective. So that's something that is a applied research project that we're doing. So what's next at NASA KSC? So our mission is almost about ready to have its first launch. The solid rocket booster was stacked this year in the VABs. I thought this was a cool picture. And then just recently, last month, the capsule, the very top here, that this is not a drawing like all the other ones were rendering. This is real. This is the actual capsule on top. The whole thing is stacked. But there were lots of structures in here. These are literally just platforms that people have to work on. And that's why they have all these things. And then eventually all the platforms were tracked away from each other. And then the vehicle will go out onto the launch pad. This is an artist's rendering of the vehicle on the launch pad, but this is what it looks like right now. And so we had to, we'll be launching in February 2022. So it's in a few months. Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 are upcoming. Artemis 2 will be a launch with people in it, and Artemis 3 will actually be people on the moon. So that is the end of my talk. Questions?
Thank you so much. That was so interesting and exciting to learn about all the cool stuff you get to do. So, what's about the average length of time it takes for you to start and complete a project?
So it really depends on the need. So we have to do, let's say, reuse testing for Orion. We're going to be reusing some of the crew modules. So let's just say that test is only going to take 90 days because we know that that's going to mock the amount of time that it takes from it to land into the ocean in the worst case scenario for something to get back to Kennedy Space Center and get to inspect. So 90-day test is more than enough to make sure that the thing's not going to corrode in that time period. But for launch structure coatings, it's 5 years. So I will tell you, it is very, very depending on the end use. And so when you're designing your test plan, you have to design thinking of that and then thinking of inspection points throughout there that make sense for your time period. So, that's how that works. It's very varied. Yeah. We literally have 50 projects going on right now, but they are so varied in times that we can do that because we're not working on them every single day.
So have you ever had a time where you were working on a project, you thought it was going really well, and then you had just some unanticipated results that you had to kind of backtrack and rethink your design?
We definitely have had things that we thought a coating was going to be really protective and it failed. And we were like, oh no, what are we going to do? An example is in the crawler floor inside of it, it's actually cracked, and it cracked because they had water inside there, and we had thought we chose the proper coating originally. Like the design engineer thought they had chosen the proper coating, but it wasn't meant to withstand water all the time, and it's just rainwater pouring into it. They can't keep the water out. It wasn't designed for that. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and figure out, like, quite honestly, I know 6 months seems like a long time, but that's pretty quick when you have to design a new coating that you know is going to last for, like, they give me 20 years as my starting point for I wanted to last this long for, Wow. So there are things out here that are lasting 40 years. So that's a lot to ask somebody to do. It was definitely trepidatious about making the choice because it's my name on it. So yeah, there's some things that you're like, so.
As a mentor, what is one of the most important qualities that you think science, someone who's going into science can have?
You know what? I will tell you the ability to ask questions, not think you know everything, and not be scared or think you have to know everything. And every time we have an intern come, the first thing we say on day one is, hey, if you break something or make a mistake, tell us. We don't care. We'd rather you tell us, and we can, because we all are just going to troubleshoot it together. We're not going to be mad at you. So I think it's just that willingness to learn, willingness to ask questions. The most successful students and people that we have are the ones that are curious, but don't think they know it all. So.
Awesome. Anything else, Cassidy?
I think I'm all set. Do you have any other questions, Jen? Or
I'm great.
Awesome. Yeah, Eliza, anything else you would like to share?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Awesome.
Just encourage people to see a path with, to follow your dream, basically.
Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. If you guys would like to learn a little bit more about the work that Eliza's doing or interact in your own classroom or at home, we do have an activity that will be linked alongside with this presentation so that you can participate and act like a materials engineer just like Eliza here. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Cassidy, if you want to go ahead and lead us out.
Yeah, so I'll say thank you again, Eliza, so much for sharing your work and your knowledge and all of your advice. If you're watching and you enjoyed this Lunch with a Scientist video, we have a whole other library, scientists from all different disciplines who are also sharing their work and research, and you can find that at this link below on our website, headwaterscienceinstitute.org. And if you're a high school student watching this and you are interested in getting a bit more experience, creating a research project of your own, we are offering a Headwaters research experience. And so what that will do is you are able to design a research program, a research project on a topic that you find interesting, and you will be mentored through that process. And so you can find more information about that program, again, on our website. And If you have any questions about the research program or programming for classrooms or anything like that, you can email us at info@headwaterscienceinstitute.org.